I still remember the exact moment when my world shattered into a million pieces. It was a Tuesday evening and I had just finished preparing Mark's favorite dinner, beef Wellington with truffle mashed potatoes, when he walked through the door with that look on his face. You know the one, where they can't quite meet your eyes, and their mouth is set in this grim line that tells you everything's about to change. "We need to talk," he said, placing his briefcase down with deliberate care. I felt my stomach drop as I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to keep my composure while my mind raced through all the possibilities. Was someone sick? Had he lost his job? But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "I'm leaving you, Sarah," he announced, with all the emotion of someone ordering coffee. "I've met someone else, a model I photographed last month. We're in love, and I'm moving out this weekend." The days that followed were a blur of tears, unanswered questions, and sleepless nights. 15 years of marriage, gone in an instant, replaced by the image of some young beauty who had captured my husband's wandering eye. At first, I couldn't even bring myself to tell anyone. The humiliation was too much to bear. How could I admit that my husband had traded me in for a newer model? Literally. I scrolled through his Instagram obsessively until I found her, Veronica, with her perfect body, flawless skin, and those pouty lips that seemed to mock me from every carefully filtered photo. She couldn't have been more than 25, nearly 20 years younger than Mark. And there he was, commenting heart emojis on her bikini shots like some lovesick teenager. She understands my creative vision. He had the audacity to tell me when I confronted him about it. As if our decade and a half together had been nothing but a creative block for his precious photography career. I watched him pack his things, taking only what he needed for the moment, promising to come back for the rest when things settled down. But something strange happened as I watched him drive away from our suburban home that Sunday afternoon. Instead of collapsing into a puddle of tears as I had been doing for days, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Maybe it was shock, or perhaps it was something else entirely. A seed of determination taking root where my heart had been broken. That night, instead of crying myself to sleep in our king-sized bed that suddenly felt too empty, I poured myself a glass of the expensive red wine Mark had been saving for a special occasion, and opened my laptop. If he thought he could just walk away from 15 years without consequences, he had severely underestimated me. The first thing I discovered was that Mark hadn't been as careful as he thought with his passwords. He still used the same one for most of his accounts. Our anniversary date followed by his mother's maiden name. Ironic that he would use our special day to hide his betrayal. Within minutes, I had access to his email, his cloud storage, and most importantly, his calendar. That's when I saw it. The details of the apartment he had rented for himself and his new girlfriend. Fully furnished, modern, downtown. Exactly the kind of place I had always wanted to live, but Mark had insisted was impractical for us. The very next morning, while Mark was at a photo shoot with his new muse, I made a phone call to the building manager of his new apartment complex. "Hello, this is Sarah Montgomery," I said, using my most professional voice. "My husband and I just rented Unit 1507, but there seems to be some confusion about the move-in date." The manager was incredibly helpful, especially when I explained that my husband had already picked up his key, but had accidentally taken mine as well. "These things happen all the time, Mrs. Montgomery," he assured me cheerfully. "I'd be happy to provide you with another key." 2 hours later, I was standing in the sleek, modern apartment that my husband had chosen for his new life. The life that didn't include me. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was exactly the kind of place I had been asking to move to for years, while Mark insisted on staying in our suburban home because it was practical and a better investment. Now I understood why. He had been saving his urban lifestyle fantasies for someone else. I walked through each room slowly, taking it all in. The floor-to-ceiling windows with breathtaking city views, the gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, the massive walk-in closet that was still empty, waiting for their clothes. What happened next wasn't planned, at least not consciously. I simply took out my phone and called my best friend, Jenna. "I need your help," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "And I need you to bring your truck." Jenna didn't ask questions. That's the kind of friend she is. She arrived an hour later with her brother's pickup truck and a determined look on her face. "Whatever you're planning, I'm in," she declared, giving me a fierce hug. We drove back to my house. The house that had never really felt like mine, I realized now. And I began methodically packing my essential belongings. My clothes, my books, my grandmother's china, my home office equipment. All the while, a plan was forming in my mind, taking shape with each item I carefully wrapped and boxed. By nightfall, we had loaded the truck with everything that truly mattered to me, leaving behind the furniture and appliances that Mark and I had chosen together over the years. "Are you sure about this?" Jenna asked as we stood in the driveway, looking back at the house that had been my home for the past decade. I nodded, feeling more certain than I had in years. "Mark wanted a new start," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "And that's exactly what he's going to get." The next part required precision timing and a bit of luck. Through Mark's calendar, I knew he was planning to move his things into the apartment on Saturday, likely with his model girlfriend in tow to help decorate their love nest. That gave me exactly 4 days to execute my plan. The first thing I did after moving my belongings into the apartment was to call a locksmith and have the locks changed. My husband and I just moved in, and were concerned about previous tenants possibly having keys, I explained smoothly. The locksmith didn't bat an eye. It was a reasonable request after all. With my new keys in hand and my clothes hanging in the walk-in closet that was supposed to be for Mark and Veronica, I felt a sense of power returning. For too long, I had been the accommodating wife, the supportive partner who had put her own dreams on hold. No more. I spent the next day setting up my home office in the second bedroom, the one Mark had likely intended as his photography studio. My desk faced the window with its panoramic view of the city skyline. My books lined the built-in shelves, and my computer was connected to the high-speed internet that came with the luxury apartment. It felt right, like this space had been waiting for me all along. On Thursday, I took another bold step. I went to the bank where Mark and I had our joint accounts. "I'd like to open a new individual account," I told the banker, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, "and I'd like to transfer my share of our joint savings." Mark had always handled our finances, insisting that it was simpler that way. But I had been paying attention over the years, quietly noting passwords and account numbers, knowing exactly how much we had and where it was kept. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't rightfully mine, just the half that belonged to me after 15 years of marriage. Patricia was efficient and discreet, helping me set up direct deposits for my freelance work, and ensuring that my new account was separate from anything Mark could access. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently as she handed me my new debit card. I considered the question for a moment before answering. "Everything is exactly as it should be," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, I actually meant it. When I returned to the apartment, my apartment now, I sent a text to Mark from my new phone number. "I've moved out of the house. We'll be in touch through my lawyer about divorce proceedings." Friday was spent preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I knew Mark would be furious when he discovered what I'd done, but I also knew he wouldn't cause a scene in public. Image had always been everything to him. So I arranged to have lunch with my sister at a cafe across the street from the apartment building, timing it perfectly for when Mark was scheduled to arrive with the first load of his belongings. I wore my favorite dress, the red one that Mark had always said was too attention-seeking for me. And my sister and I sat at a table by the window where we could see everyone entering and exiting the building. Right on schedule, at 1:15 p.m., Mark's car pulled up to the curb. He got out, looking annoyingly handsome in his casual weekend attire, and opened the trunk, which was filled with suitcases. Veronica emerged from the passenger side, her long blonde hair catching the sunlight. They looked like a couple from a magazine spread, successful photographer and his beautiful model girlfriend starting their exciting new life together. If only they knew what was waiting for them upstairs. "That's them?" my sister asked, following my gaze. I nodded, taking a sip of my wine. "Just wait," I said, checking my watch. 3, 2, 1. Right on cue, my phone rang. It was Mark. I showed the screen to my sister before answering with a calm "Hello, Mark." His voice came through, tight with barely controlled rage. "What the hell, Sarah? I just got to the apartment and my key doesn't work. And the doorman says someone else is already living there." I could hear Veronica in the background, asking what was wrong in her high-pitched voice. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding," I replied, keeping my tone light and pleasant. "I've been living in apartment 1507 since Tuesday. It's quite lovely. You made an excellent choice. The views are spectacular, just like I always wanted." There was a moment of stunned silence before he exploded. "You what? That's my apartment. I signed the lease." I couldn't help but smile at that. "Actually, you should read the lease more carefully. You listed both of us as tenants, probably out of habit. As your legal wife, I had every right to move in. And as for changing the locks, well, I was concerned about security. This is an expensive neighborhood after all." Through the cafe window, I could see him pacing on the sidewalk, one hand gripping his phone, the other gesticulating wildly as Veronica stood by looking confused and uncomfortable. "You can't do this," Mark sputtered, his voice rising an octave. "Where am I supposed to go? All my stuff is still at the house." It was remarkable how quickly he had gone from confident deserter to panicked victim. "The house is still there," I replied calmly. "You were so insistent on keeping it all these years because it was such a great investment, remember? Now you get to enjoy all that practical suburban living you always praised." I paused, letting the irony sink in. "Of course, you'll need to refinance it in your name only, since I've already spoken with my lawyer about removing myself from the mortgage. Oh, and you might want to call a cleaning service. I left things a bit disorganized when I moved out." That was an understatement. While I hadn't damaged anything, I had definitely left every drawer open, every cabinet door ajar, and every piece of his precious photography equipment spread out across the dining room table. Not to mention the framed photographs of us that now lay face down throughout the house, like breadcrumbs leading to the master bedroom where I'd left a particularly special surprise. All of his expensive suits removed from their protective bags and piled on the bed, with a bottle of my perfume accidentally spilled across them. "You've lost your mind," Mark hissed into the phone. "I'm coming up there right now to sort this out." I laughed then, a genuine laugh that felt wonderfully liberating. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. I've left strict instructions with building security not to let you up without my permission. Apparently, they take their residents' safety very seriously here." Through the window, I could see a security guard approaching Mark and Veronica, likely responding to their increasingly animated conversation on the sidewalk. "Oh, and before I forget," I continued, "you should check your email. My lawyer has sent over the initial divorce papers. I think you'll find the terms quite reasonable, considering the circumstances." I watched as Mark pulled his phone away from his ear, presumably to check his notifications. His face went pale as he scrolled through what I knew was a comprehensive list of our assets, complete with my proposed division that heavily favored me based on his infidelity. "You can't prove anything," he said when he returned to our call, but his voice lacked conviction. "Can't I?" I replied softly. "It's amazing what people leave lying around in their email accounts. All those messages between you and Veronica going back 6 months. The hotel receipts. The jewelry purchases that never made it to my jewelry box." I paused, letting that sink in. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I would just quietly accept whatever crumbs of dignity you decided to throw my way?" Across the street, I could see that Mark had moved away from Veronica and the security guard, turning his back to them as he hunched over his phone. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice hollow with defeat. It was the question I had been waiting for, the moment when he realized that he wasn't in control anymore. "I want exactly what I deserve," I answered simply. "Half of everything we built together, the freedom to live my life on my terms, and the satisfaction of knowing that your perfect little plan didn't work out quite the way you expected." As I spoke, I saw Veronica throwing her hands up in exasperation and walking back to Mark's car, clearly done with the whole situation. "You could have just asked for a divorce like a normal person," Mark muttered, watching helplessly as his girlfriend climbed into his car and slammed the door. "You didn't have to go nuclear." I couldn't help but laugh at that. A normal person? Is that what you think you were being when you secretly dated a model for 6 months before blindsiding me with divorce? When you rented this gorgeous apartment that you always told me we couldn't afford? When you planned to leave me with a house that needs a new roof and plumbing updates while you started fresh in the city? I shook my head. even though he couldn't see me. No, Mark. You set the rules for this game when you decided to lie and cheat. I'm just playing it better than you expected. Through the window, I watched as Veronica honked the horn impatiently. Mark looked torn, clearly wanting to continue arguing with me, but also afraid of losing his new girlfriend in the process. This isn't over, he threatened weakly. Actually it is, I replied. The locksmith will be here soon to change the locks again, just in case you got any ideas about making a copy of my key. Goodbye, Mark. And with that, I hung up and turned back to my sister, who was looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. Are you sure about all this? She asked as we finished our lunch, watching Mark climb dejectedly into the passenger seat of his own car, now driven by an obviously furious Veronica. What if he fights you on the divorce? I smiled, feeling more confident and alive than I had in years. Let him try, I replied, taking the last sip of my wine. I've got copies of everything, the emails, the credit card statements, the text messages. His lawyer will advise him to settle quickly and quietly. And I was right. Within 3 weeks, Mark's attorney reached out to mine with a settlement offer that gave me everything I had asked for, and then some. Apparently, Mark was eager to move on and avoid unnecessary conflict. Translation. He was terrified of what would come out if we went to court. As for Veronica, she lasted exactly 17 days after the apartment incident before breaking things off with Mark. I know this because she actually reached out to me via Instagram, of all places. I had no idea he was such a liar, she wrote. He told me you two were already separated for months. I'm really sorry. I appreciated the apology, though it wasn't necessary. In a way, she had done me a favor, exposing the truth about the man I had wasted 15 years loving. Life in my downtown apartment is everything I dreamed it would be. I wake up each morning to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, enjoy my coffee on the balcony overlooking the bustling city below, and spend my days building the freelance writing business I had always wanted to pursue but never had the courage to start. Sometimes I think about Mark, back in our old suburban house that he never really wanted, paying a mortgage he can barely afford now that he has to do it alone. Last I heard, his photography business was struggling. Turns out, quite a few of his clients were actually my friends who no longer wanted to work with him after learning how he had treated me. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. Instead, I focus on the life I'm creating for myself. The friends who stood by me, the family who supported me, and the future that's finally mine to shape. People often ask if I'm angry about what happened, if I regret the years I spent with someone who didn't deserve me. The truth is, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, but for the strength I found in its aftermath. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you need. A chance to discover who you truly are when everything you thought you knew falls apart. I was having lunch with my sister last week, when she asked me a question that made me pause. Do you ever miss being married? She wanted to know, watching me carefully over the rim of her coffee cup. It had been exactly 1 year since Mark had walked out of our marriage, and into what he thought would be his glamorous new life. 1 year since I had turned the tables on him in a way he never saw coming. I considered her question seriously before answering. I missed the idea of marriage, I finally said. The partnership, the shared goals, the sense of building something together. But I don't miss my marriage to Mark. And that was the honest truth. What I had with Mark wasn't a true partnership. It was a carefully constructed facade that hid his selfishness and my compromise. For 15 years, I had made myself smaller to accommodate his ego, had set aside my own dreams to support his ambitions, had convinced myself that his happiness was more important than my own. It took his betrayal for me to realize how much of myself I had given away, piece by tiny piece, until there was almost nothing left. The woman who moved into this apartment a year ago was a stranger to me, fierce, unapologetic, unwilling to settle for less than she deserved. That's the thing about betrayal. It changes you in ways you never expected. For some, it hardens them, turns them bitter and mistrustful. But for me, it was like being released from a cage I hadn't even realized I was in. Suddenly, I could breathe again, could dream again, could imagine a future that was entirely of my own making. In the aftermath of Mark's departure, I discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years, my creativity, my courage, my capacity for joy that wasn't dependent on someone else's approval. I started writing again, not just the freelance articles that now paid my bills, but stories that came from deep within me, narratives about women finding their power in unexpected ways. Last month, to my astonishment, one of these stories was accepted by a prestigious literary magazine. When the acceptance email arrived, I danced around my apartment in giddy celebration, then stopped suddenly, realizing there was no one to share the news with. For a brief moment, old habits tried to reassert themselves, the instinct to diminish my accomplishment, to pretend it wasn't really that big a deal. But then I picked up my phone and called my friends, invited them over for champagne and celebration, and allowed myself to fully own my success. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago, much faster than I had anticipated. Mark didn't contest any of my requests, not the apartment, which I now own outright thanks to the settlement, not the division of assets, which heavily favored me given his infidelity, not even the alimony payments that his lawyer surely advised him to fight. I sometimes wonder if his quick capitulation was motivated by guilt or simply by a desperate desire to move on with his life, to pretend that his spectacular failure of a marriage was just a minor setback on his path to happiness. Either way, I'm grateful for the clean break and the financial security it provided. The last time I saw Mark was in our lawyer's office, signing the final papers. He looked older somehow, diminished, with new lines around his eyes and a tightness to his mouth that hadn't been there before. "You got what you wanted," he said as we waited for the elevator afterward, his voice flat and resigned. I considered this for a moment before responding. "No," I finally replied. "I got what I needed. There's a difference." The elevator arrived then, saving him from having to formulate a response. We rode down 16 floors in silence, and when the doors opened, we walked in opposite directions without saying goodbye. Sometimes I think about Veronica, who turned out to be as much a victim of Mark's lies as I was. We've kept in touch, surprisingly enough, developing an unlikely friendship built on our shared experience of Mark's manipulation. She's back in school now, studying business with plans to open her own modeling agency someday. "I'm done being the face," she told me over coffee last month. "I want to be the brain behind the operation." I admire her resilience, her refusal to be defined by her relationship with Mark or her identity as a model. In many ways, her journey mirrors my own. Two women reclaiming their power after allowing a man to make them doubt their worth. When she asked if I was dating again, I laughed and shook my head. "Not yet," I admitted. "I'm still getting to know myself." And it's true. After 15 years of being Mark's wife, I'm still discovering who Sarah really is. What she wants, what she dreams of, what makes her heart race with excitement. I've gone back to school too, taking night classes in creative writing and business management. Last week, I submitted an application for a grant to start a small publishing company focused on women's stories of transformation. It's a long shot, but even the act of applying felt like a victory, a declaration of faith in my own abilities and vision. There are still hard days, of course. Days when I wake up reaching for someone who isn't there, when the apartment feels too quiet and my achievements seem hollow without someone to share them with. On those days, I remind myself that loneliness is the price of freedom, at least for now. I remind myself of all the mornings I woke up next to Mark, feeling more alone in his presence than I ever have in his absence. And then I get up, make my coffee, stand on my balcony as the city wakes around me, and plan my day with a sense of possibility that never existed in my old life. Last night, I went on a date for the first time since the divorce. Nothing serious, just dinner with a kind-eyed professor I met in my writing class. We talked for hours about books and travel, and the power of narrative to shape our understanding of the world. He didn't once check his phone or look around the restaurant to see if anyone more interesting had walked in. Two of Mark's most annoying habits. When he asked about my marriage, I gave him the condensed version. Husband left for a younger woman. Wife got revenge by taking his dream apartment. Everyone lived happily-ish, ever after. He laughed at that. A genuine laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Remind me never to cross you," he said, raising his glass in a toast. But the truth is, I'm not the vengeful woman from that story anymore. She served her purpose, giving me the strength to stand up for myself when I needed it most. But revenge is exhausting. A fire that consumes the one who carries it as surely as it burns the one it's aimed at. The woman sitting across from the professor last night wasn't interested in settling scores or proving points. She was simply curious, open to possibility, willing to risk disappointment for the chance at genuine connection. When he walked me home, stopping at the entrance to my building rather than assuming he was invited up, I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just attraction, but respect. Respect for him and his boundaries, and more importantly, respect for myself and what I now know I deserve. We made plans to meet again next week, and as I watched him walk away, I felt neither desperation nor fear, just a quiet anticipation of getting to know someone new. Whether it leads to something lasting or becomes just another step on my journey doesn't matter as much as the fact that I'm moving forward, eyes open, heart cautious but not closed. This morning, I received an unexpected email from Mark's mother, with whom I'd always had a good relationship. "I've been thinking about you," she wrote. "I want you to know that despite everything that happened with Mark, I still consider you family. If you ever want to have coffee and catch up, I'd love that." I sat with the email for a long time, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to delete it, to sever this last tie to my old life. But another part recognized the olive branch for what it was. An acknowledgement that relationships are complex, that love can exist even in the aftermath of betrayal. In the end, I wrote back, thanking her for reaching out and suggesting we meet next month when the dust of the past year had settled a bit more. Her response came quickly. "I'll wait as long as you need." There was something profoundly moving about that simple sentence, about the patience and understanding it conveyed. It reminded me that healing isn't linear, that moving forward doesn't necessarily mean leaving everything behind. Some connections are worth preserving, worth rebuilding on new foundations of truth and mutual respect. As I look ahead to the second year of my new life, I find myself filled with a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. Not the brash, defensive certainty that fueled my initial revenge plan, but something deeper and more sustainable. A bone-deep knowledge that whatever comes next, I can handle it. I survived the worst betrayal I could imagine and emerged stronger, clearer about who I am and what I want. There's freedom in that realization, and a responsibility too, to use this hard-won wisdom not just for myself, but to help others who might be where I was a year ago, blindsided by betrayal and unsure how to take the next breath, let alone the next step. That's why I started the blog, After the Ending, Building a New Beginning, where I share my story along with practical advice on everything from hiring a good divorce lawyer to finding your creative voice in the aftermath of loss. To my surprise, it's developed quite a following, with women, and some men, from around the world reaching out to share their own journeys through betrayal and beyond. Each message reminds me that pain, when transformed through courage and community, can become purpose. The other day, I was standing on my balcony watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, when a memory surfaced, something Mark said to me on our 15th anniversary, just weeks before he left. "You're so lucky to have me," he'd remarked casually, as if stating an obvious fact. At the time, I'd nodded in agreement, believing it to be true. Now, with a year's perspective and healing behind me, I finally understand how wrong we both were. The luck wasn't mine in having him. It was his in having me, my loyalty, my support, my unwavering belief in his potential even when he couldn't see it himself. And when he betrayed that gift, he didn't just lose a wife. He lost the one person who would have stood by him through anything, who would have forgiven almost any mistake if he'd only been honest. That realization doesn't bring me joy or vindication, just a sad clarity about what was lost and what was found in its place. As the last light faded from the sky and the city lights began to twinkle below me, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I dim my light for someone else's comfort. Never again would I mistake control for love or sacrifice for partnership. The next chapter of my story would be written in my own hand, with terms of my own choosing. And so here I stand, 1 year after the end of what I thought was my whole life, discovering that it was just the prologue to something far more authentic and fulfilling. They say that living well is the best revenge, but I've found that living truthfully is even better. Honoring your own needs and boundaries, acknowledging both your vulnerabilities and your strengths, allowing yourself to be fully seen rather than carefully curated. The apartment that was meant to be Mark's love nest with Veronica has become my sanctuary, my creative workspace, my launching pad for dreams too long deferred. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the city hums below me and the stars peek through the urban glow above, I raise a glass to the woman I was. The one who thought her husband's betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to her. Thank you. I whisper to her, this former version of myself who couldn't imagine survival, let alone thriving. Thank you for holding on just long enough for me to find my way back to myself. And in that moment of gratitude for both what was lost and what was found, I feel a circle closing, a wound healing, a story continuing beyond what was supposed to be its end. This isn't the life I planned, but looking around at what I've built from the ashes of betrayal, I wouldn't trade it for the safety of what came before. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you needed.